Welcome. So today is our move into stillness meeting, and so what is our aim? What is our intention, and what can you expect from today's meeting? Apparently, you can expect a blurry camera. I don't know. Okay, so. First of all, so this is move into stillness. It's our somatic movement exploration. So what does that mean? So first of all, we have this word somatic, which is an interesting word. You know, like so many of these words, we can just gloss over, but maybe there's some value in it. So let's take a look at what this word is pointing to. So somatic, it's a well, it derives from the word soma, and so what is a soma? Well, the suggestion is that a soma is, let's say, an entity or an experience or a field of experience that you have access to, and so it's we could view it almost like an intermediary or the glue that binds together the inward and the outward experience. So this seems maybe a little bit academic, but it's important because you'll get benefit from it if you can understand that what we're really looking at here is it's a shift in perception, and that when you enter into this way of perceiving, to this field of the soma, then you gain access to greater resourcefulness and an experience of greater freedom. And this means you become aware of patterns, and you can release those patterns. So so this is it's not limited by either the inner or the outer. So what does that mean? Well, we have an inner sense of ourselves, and we have an outer sense of ourselves. So we could say, like, first person and third person. You have a sense of being first person, and then you have a sense of yourself as third person. So these are both useful perspectives, but here we want something, or what we're exploring is something that is the marriage of both. It's between both. So how can you experience this? How can you discover this? Well, one way, and we'll start to make this experiential. So you can just close the eyes. It's helpful to close the eyes for this exploration, because anytime that we are viewing through the eyes, that's such, for those of us who are sighted at least, such a strong influence that it can tend to overshadow everything else. So just close the eyes as long as that's comfortable for you. If it's not comfortable, you can keep them open. And then just notice that you have a sense of existing in space and form. So there's simply the sense of being, the sense of existence, and that's, we could say, the inner, the most primal sense of being. And but just slightly, let's say, on top of that is this sense of being in space and form. So you have a sense that you exist in space and form. This is in technical terms, this is called a proprioception. So it means that we have these, we could say, sensors that give us information, and that information we are accustomed to understanding in a particular way that generates a model. So we have this model, even though if our eyes are closed, we're not seeing ourselves on the outside. We're not seeing the physical form, but we have a sense that we exist in a form and in space. So that we make it a little bit more common, everyday language, you just have a sense that you have a body, and that this body occupies a certain amount of space, and that it exists in a location, and it is, you have a sense of how it exists relative to what we would consider to be gravity, or we could just say relative to the surface that you're on. So you have all of that information in that model that's just there. You can notice that. So this is a little bit subtle, but not so subtle. So you don't have to go looking really hard for it. It's pretty obvious if you just allow yourself to notice. It's not really complicated. You just know that you have a sense of yourself existing in space and in a form. So you, in other words, you have your model that just happens automatically gives you a sense that you know where your head is. So you could, if you wanted, even with your eyes closed, and you could just try this out, you could just take a hand, either hand, and just touch the head, anywhere on the head, gently. So you can notice that you're able to do that. Hopefully, most likely. So how does that happen? Well, it's easy to overlook this significance of it, but it's actually fairly amazing if you consider that you have this ability to have a awareness of yourself as existing in space and having a form, and that you can, based on this information, you can take action. And then if you would like, you're welcome to keep the eyes closed, or you could slowly open the eyes. So now we have a sense of, maybe a little bit, slightly clearer sense of what the Soma is. So the Soma is it's not the body really, though it doesn't exclude the body, and it's not just simply awareness, though it doesn't exclude awareness, but it's awareness. It's that marriage between awareness and the body. Okay. So now you can notice that this is natural to you. You don't have to struggle for it. It's just exists. And because it exists, we can, and we don't have to do anything for it, we can easily overlook it. It can seem very insignificant. Chances are that even this little exploration that we've done so far seems insignificant. It's there. The mind says, yeah, okay, big deal. Who cares? But it turns out that it makes an enormous difference, because this is how we are. This is how we're functioning. This is how we're functioning almost all the time. And if this is highly functional model that we have, if the Soma is very functional, then we have a good experience. So what that means is that we have an expectation. We want to achieve something. Whether that's just our ability to scratch the nose, or our ability to take a step, or our ability to encounter some social experience with a degree of confidence. All of these things, we have an expectation, and then our ability to match that expectation with our action determines whether we like the experience or not, really. So this is actually turns out to be very, very, very important on so many levels. So we can see maybe that if you want to take an action, you have a desire, whatever that desire is. That's what I described some simple examples, like you have a desire, I want to scratch my nose, or you have a desire, I want to be able to reach that thing and I want to bring it closer to me, or I want to be able to get that thing and put it in my mouth, or I want to be able to take a step, or I want to be able to have confidence that I'm safe in a social setting. Okay, so these are just examples, but in all of these, you notice that that's the desire, and if we are able to successfully take action that's in alignment with our desire and it provides feedback that we've matched our expectation, then we feel good. In a sense, it's really that simple. We have a desire, we're able to take action that fulfills that desire, and so we feel good. It's a simple feedback. Well, it's a very complex feedback system, but when we just look at it in these simple terms, it's very simple. So there's an output, which is there's the output, which is the desire and the action, and then there's the input, which is the feedback as to whether that action matched the outcome of that matched our expectation or the desire. So if there's a perfect match, then we have perfect feeling. And if there's an imperfect match, we have imperfect feeling. And if there's a mismatch, then we have feeling that we interpret as, I don't like this. So maybe you can start to see how enormous the implications of this are. This actually touches everything in our lives. There's nothing in our lives that's not influenced by this, or this is not a significant aspect of. Okay. So this is now, what is the fundamental problem that we encounter, if you look at it in these terms, is actually simply that we have a mismatch between our expectation or our desire or our intention and the feedback that we're getting. In other words, to put it in a practical term, I want something. Let's say I want something that's over there, and I'm reaching for it, but I'm not able to get it. So I'm expecting that I can reach and I can get it and I can bring it to me. But I'm not able to achieve that. So what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to experience a feeling. And that feeling I will interpret in terms of something like frustration or disappointment or something of that nature, anger. It could be a lot of different variations on a theme, but something that we would understand to be unwanted. Now, in the short term, what this motivates is simply a feedback saying, didn't work. So then we try again. Well, in a perfect world, let's say, we learn from each attempt, and we learn what it is that we're doing that's not working, so that we cease to do what's not working. And through that process, we refine the action until we have success. However, what has happened for many of us, well, for all of us to some degree, is that either, well, for a variety of reasons, and I'll briefly go into what those are. That feedback mechanism has now been, in a sense, hijacked. It's not really the right way to put it, but the feedback mechanism is still working perfectly. Everything is working perfectly, but there's one factor that is now getting us further entrenched in a pattern of dysfunction, a pattern where we don't have success, where that mismatch between our expectation and the fulfillment or the outcome continues to not only be maintained, but generally increases, the mismatch increases. So when that happens, what occurs, because our nervous system is only able to handle so much consciously, is that eventually the nervous system determines that's just sort of white noise. We're not achieving success here. So that it goes below the conscious threshold, and it now it's a learned thing, but it's not a helpful pattern. It's not an efficient pattern. So we now have this unhelpful, inefficient pattern that's learned. It's in the unconscious, but the nervous system has basically just said, stop paying attention to this consciously because we're not able to have success. Well, that's not good news if it's something that we keep encountering. It's fine if it's something that we can avoid, but if it's something that we keep encountering, then what happens is that dysfunctional pattern is still playing out. So we're still attempting this action that's based on an unsuccessful pattern. We're still not achieving the desired outcome. And so this feedback mechanism is still continuing to feedback lack of success. But now we're not registering it consciously. Instead, it's being registered unconsciously. And all that bubbles up into the conscious level is badness. I just feel bad. But we don't have any real clarity on what it is that I'm doing that's producing that. So, of course, if we're very focused on either first person or third person, meaning inner or outer, we miss the important ingredient, which is what binds them or brings them together. So that, and this is where most of our attention is most of the time. We're very focused on just, I feel bad, or we're focused on some so-called objective theory or description of what the problem is. But we see that generally doesn't give us good results. So here we want to bring both of those together, which is naturally occurs through the Soma, through the somatic exploration. So now let's begin the actual movement exploration. And you can do today's exploration, you can do either sitting or you can do, I'm going to be doing it sitting. And if you want to follow along exactly with my instructions, you'll do it sitting. But if you find that is awkward or uncomfortable or distressing or too much strain, then you can modify and choose a different posture. So with this work, it's very important that we don't push or strain excessively, because what we're wanting to do is become aware of those patterns. So if we simply put more effort in, then more effort is just going to be routed through the same dysfunctional or maladaptive pattern, and it won't become conscious. So our goal with this is to allow for that patterning to become conscious. It's only when, as it becomes conscious, that we we can learn and we can do something better. So sometimes just sitting is too strenuous. At the same time, we don't want to just try and achieve maximum comfort, because our idea of comfort is distorted. So we'll be we'll be actually straining, even though we may not be conscious of it. We'll be straining to achieve our idea of comfort, and we'll just sort of go unconscious. So we want to straddle these two extremes. So we want to be as right on the as much on the edge of discomfort and comfort as possible, so that we're not fully in either. We're not collapsing into our idea of comfort, and neither are we straining into excessive discomfort, but we're right on the edge. So you can find what that is for you. It may be that lying down is exactly where you find that balance, or it may be that you find that sitting. It may be that you can find that sitting as I am, upright without a leaning against a backrest. If that's possible for you, then I will, as I always do, I suggest that that's the most, let's say, ideal, all other things equal, because it will allow you to really trust in the innate structure, the innate support of your skeletal system, which is another somewhat important idea that I suggest often in these, is that we want to really start to notice how much we are not trusting the skeleton. And then we can start to be curious about why that is, that we're not trusting the skeleton. So it's very revealing. If you're sitting upright, then you, in truth, your skeleton, with maybe very minor additional effort on the part of your muscular system, but by and large, the skeleton can do most of it. So if you find that sitting upright is strenuous, then what it's revealing to you actually is that you're not trusting. But it's a process, so you can't leap ahead. You have to start where you are. So if you find that it's just overwhelmingly strenuous to sit upright without leaning against something, then you modify so that you can be present. You can feel your you can feel into the somatic experience, and at the same time you are not straining excessively. So for today's exploration, we're going to use our hands. And so our hands are very powerful, because maybe for many reasons, but our hands are among the most sensitive parts of our bodies, unless we've cultivated it otherwise. But by default, the hands have a very large, disproportionately large representation in the sensory motor homunculus in the brain compared to other parts of the body. So when we use our hands to place them on the body in places, then we significantly increase our time. We decrease the time to successful outcome with this work versus not using the hands. So it's not always practical to use the hands, but in today's exploration, it will be. So I want you to, if it's comfortable for you, you're going to take your hands and you're going to place them on your on your waist. So you want to, I'll just show you so you can find my camera. Oh, there we go. It came into focus. So you're going to take them and place them on the waist so that the thumb, it goes on the back side and the other fingers wrap around the front side. And you're going to do that on both the left and right sides simultaneously, as long as it's comfortable for you. If that's not, then you obviously shouldn't do it. So you're going to notice as you place your hands there that there's a lot of soft tissue, but there's also some bone, and you want to start to see if you can feel that bone. And in particular, what you should notice, or what I'll point out to you, is that there's your pelvis. So you're really wanting to kind of rest your hands on the top of the pelvis. So your pelvis, when you're sitting upright or standing upright, has these two fan-like crests. They're called the iliac crests on either side, and those are the highest points. And when you place your hands on the waist, you should be able to feel them there. Now, depending on the amount of tension that you're holding, unnecessary tension in the soft tissue, it may not be super clear to you where the bones are, but don't worry too much about that. You just notice whatever you can. Okay, so before we go any further, I want you to notice now how you're doing this. So we're going to be letting our hands rest here for a while. So we want this to be as sustainable and comfortable and enjoyable as possible. But notice, not even if, because it's a given that it is happening, notice where and how you're straining unnecessarily in order to let your hands rest on the waist. So you might notice, for example, that you're holding unnecessary tension in the shoulders. And you might notice that you're holding unnecessary tension in the hands. And you might notice that you're holding unnecessary tension in the arms, in the forearms, in the upper arms. And you might notice that you're holding unnecessary tension in the shoulder blades. So the shoulder blades are on the back. You might notice that you're holding unnecessary tension in the neck. And you might find that you're holding unnecessary tension in the throat. And you might also notice, because you have your hands placed there, that you're holding unnecessary tension in the abdomen, front side and back side, and on the left and right sides. Now, if at any point this becomes uncomfortable and strenuous and you don't know how to let it be restful, and you don't know how to soften and let that go, then please just take a rest from it. So at any time that you need, then you can just take your hands from the waist and just rest. In fact, let's all do that now so that we don't introduce a whole lot of strain before we even get too far into the exploration. And notice now, with your hands off of the waist, can you still notice how you still have a heightened awareness of that area where the hands were? And notice the difference between the right side and the left side. Does one side seem higher than the other? Does one side seem more forward or more backward than the other? Does one side seem clearer in your awareness than the other? So there's not a right or wrong answer. There's just the truth of whatever you notice. And then see if it's possible just to stay with that, with those sensations without making any adjustments. So you might notice that there's some impulses that arise to make an adjustment, because when you become aware of those sensations and your brain starts to interpret them and it says, oh, that side's higher than the other, or that side feels a little too forward, or that side feels strange in some way, then you'll notice that instantly what also arises are impulses to adjust. And those impulses to adjust, no matter what you may think about them, actually they are arising from the unconscious, and they are parts of the dysfunctional or maladaptive patterns that are producing frustration in your life or pain in your life. So we just want to be aware of them, and then you can just see if, as you're aware of them, you can allow them just to sort of dissolve. And maybe that makes sense to you, and maybe it doesn't make sense to you. If it doesn't make sense to you, then just be curious about that possibility. Okay, and then let's again bring our hands and place them on the waist. And this time, see if you can do that entire movement of bringing the hands and placing them on the waist without introducing unnecessary effort. So notice you've already have an increased conscious awareness of this whole process. So you can be aware of that entire movement of bringing the hands from rest to bringing them to the waist, and notice where in that movement you habitually introduce unnecessary effort, and let it be smooth and relaxed. And then let's repeat that a few times. So we're going to now bring the hands off of the waist and then just let them come to a resting position in the lap or hanging at the sides. And see if you can allow that movement also to be without introducing unnecessary effort. So obviously there's some effort that goes into doing the movement, but we want to allow that movement to be as effortless as possible, so that there's nothing extra, nothing unnecessary. So let's just do that a few more times, slowly bringing the hands from the resting position to the waist, and then pausing there and letting go of any unnecessary effort that crept in, because some will have crept in. And then continuing to let that whole movement be as effortless as possible, slowly bringing the hands off of the waist and to rest either in the lap or at the sides. Okay, and then if you need to rest here a little bit longer, that's fine. For everybody who's ready, we'll now bring the hands one more time to the waist, and this time we're going to let them rest here for probably a few minutes as we do an exploration. But again, if you need at any point to remove the hands from the waist and take a little rest from this particular exploration, please do, because there's no benefit to be had in trying to just push through. That's really, really important. And it's an important part of the process and the learning to notice these habits of how we use violence, how we push ourselves, how we abuse ourselves, how we treat ourselves with lack of compassion or kindness. It might seem insignificant, but it's an enormous thing. It's very, very important. So it's a very, very important part of the process. So please, again, just be aware if you're straining, if you're pushing, and be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, and know that it's important and it's part of this process. It's an important part of the learning process to be willing to rest when needed. Okay, so for those of us who have our hands on our waist, let's close the eyes and then just tune into the breath. So just notice the breath and notice the quality of the breath as you can feel it, both inwardly and with your hands. So how is this part of yourself that you can feel with your hands? How is it moving and how does it feel? What's the quality of the experience as you're breathing? So don't try to force the breath to be any particular way, but rather just notice how it is. Notice what your experience of that is. Does it feel satisfying and pleasurable? And in any way that it feels forced or strained or unfulfilling, just be curious about that. And instead of trying to force it to be something, just become aware of how it is that you are presently doing whatever that restriction or limitation is that's already in place. So rather than trying to force the breath to change, we want to just be aware of how it is that we're already making unnecessary effort, and we want to start to just release that and soften that. So notice that the feedback through the hands is very helpful. So because we have the hands on both sides, the right and left, you can very easily sense the symmetry or asymmetry of the movement. So more or less, the breath, we want the breath to be symmetrical. There's slight asymmetries in the body as regards the breath, but more or less we want to notice a fairly symmetrical breath, meaning that both the right and the left side should feel very similar, the quality of the experience. So notice, does the right side feel the same as the left side in terms of the way that you perceive it in space, the way you perceive it in form, the way that you perceive the quality of it? Does it feel just as soft and yielding and easy? Do you have equal clarity of the bones of the iliac crests on either side, or are they different? And if they're different, start to be curious as you're just continuing to allow yourself to breathe. What can you let go of? What can you soften? Where can you be more yielding that will allow for greater symmetry? Okay, and then let's slowly bring the hands back to the lap or the sides. And then just notice that you're still breathing, you're still aware of the breath. And notice here, so hopefully you notice that you were able to release or soften some. So the breath, without trying to force the breath to change, the breath did change. And the quality of the sensation, hopefully you notice, is a little improved. So without the hands placed there, So now the hands are just in the lap or at the sides. You still have awareness of the area where you had the hands. And as we did before, just notice now if there's any impulse or impulses that arise to try and make some kind of adjustment or correction, and don't make any adjustment or correction. Just notice. See, there's a very strong pull in the nervous system to reproduce the existing pattern. So there's a pattern of an asymmetrical pattern, a pattern in which there's strain. And even though it's inefficient and it generates pain and discomfort and distress in our lives, the nervous system is entirely configured presently around that pattern. And so there's a very strong pull to go back into the pattern. Just be aware of that pull, be aware of the impulses to make adjustments, and you'll notice, you should, or you will likely notice that your nervous system is telling you something's off. You're leaning, or you're tight on one side, or you're twisted in some way, or something seems off, and just continue to soften, just continue to be aware of those impulses and just simply let them dissolve. So don't take any action to correct anything. Just continue to soften and release. So it will eventually happen if you just continue with this process, and some of you may have discovered it already. Eventually it happens that those impulses dissolve enough that they're no longer compelling, and there's a shift in which you start to feel that this is better. The way that you are presently in space and form is better than the old pattern. So that's a very positive indication. So we normally go through this stage of there's a discomfort, there's a pull back into the old pattern. And you'll notice that actually that pull is back to unconscious, wants to go back into unconscious. So if we're willing to just be still, restful, and present through that, then what happens is there's a shift, because there's a discovery that occurs, which is, oh, this is better. So we just have to allow for that update to take place. Before that takes place, in a sense, the magic hasn't really worked yet, because until that takes place, then that old pattern is still established, and that will be our default, and we'll go back to that. But once this shift takes place, that pattern is no longer, we no longer perceive that as being a useful pattern. So now there's a freedom that we're no longer organized around something that's maladaptive. So we're coming into greater balance. Okay, so again, if it's comfortable for you, bring the hands and place them on the waist. And this time, same thing, we're going to be aware of the breath, but this time we're going to introduce some intention, so that on the exhalations, so we'll continue just to breathe normally, in the sense that you're not holding the breath at any point. But on each of the exhalations, you're going to have this intention to allow the exhalation to be as complete and elongated as possible without introducing unnecessary strain. So just allow the exhalation to be elongated. So you'll notice that there's a habit, a habitual point at which you turn around the breath from exhalation to inhalation. And here we're wanting to just explore. So the intention allows us to explore, to just continue the exhalation a little bit more without introducing unnecessary strain. So there'll be a point at which you don't know how to exhale any further without straining, but we want to see how far we can go. And it's an interesting process because your brain can't quite make sense of it at first. It seems totally bizarre, but if you just trust in it, if you just keep exploring this, you'll start to discover, especially with the hands placed here, that it really is possible. And the way that it's possible, it turns out, is by releasing the unnecessary effort elsewhere. So with the hands placed here, you may find, for example, that there's a chronic low level, or maybe even not that low level, strain on the back side, or on the front side, or on the left side, or on the right side. And as you just continue to explore, letting the exhalation be elongated, you'll find that you become aware of that in a new way, and you become aware bit by bit of how to release it. So without trying to change the alignment of your bones, the bones will slowly, subtly begin to shift to come into a natural alignment. So you just continue as long as it's comfortable for you. And remember, you can and should take a break anytime you need. So anytime you become overwhelmed by fatigue or strain, you just take a rest. And just see each time you are inhaling and each time you are exhaling, just see what more you can let go of. You might be surprised at where you're holding that unnecessary effort. Maybe you'll start to notice it. Another place you might notice it is on the pelvic floor. So maybe you chronically are squeezing the soft tissue at the pelvic floor. So you can just start to become aware of that and slowly releasing and softening. And then let's all slowly bring the hands to rest either in the lap or the sides. And then, just as we've done before, notice what you're aware of in that area where you had the hands, and just notice how you interpret that, what the model is. So there's a model, and that model is inaccurate. The degree of inaccuracy determines the degree of negative experience that we have, because we're always trying to maintain that model. But if it's inaccurate, meaning we think we're upright, but actually we're twisted and leaning, we're going to work really hard all the time to maintain that twisting and leaning, because our nervous system believes that's upright. So what's happening now is you just continue to notice, is you notice where there's a mismatch in between the model and reality. So you'll notice, as I've suggested, that there will be impulses to try and correct, because your nervous system is saying, I seem to be leaning, I seem to be falling, I seem to be twisting, I seem to be shortened on one side. And you just don't indulge those habits of effort. Just continue to remain restful. Don't introduce any unnecessary effort. Don't make any movement that's not needed. Just be aware of the impulses and then allow those impulses to soften and release. Okay, so we'll do one more movement exploration. And this one is a little bit more advanced. So be very, very gentle with this one. So again, we're going to take our hands and put them on the waist, just as we've been doing. And you want to, now we're going to, I'll describe the movement and then you'll do it after I describe it. So I'll describe it first. So don't do the movement yet. Just listen to the description. So we're going to keep our hands on the waist. And we're going to have awareness. This is, of course, it's only going to work if you're sitting, okay? Otherwise, you'll have to make a significant modification. So, and I can't give you advice about what that modification would be. So the instructions only if you're sitting. But if you're assuming you're sitting, you have your hands placed on the waist, and you can notice that your hands are on top of the iliac crests, and that the iliac crests are part of these very large bones that make up the hemipelvises, and that those go all the way down to the surface that you're sitting on, so that in a sense, your hands are connected to the surface that you're on by way of the pelvic bones. So they're resting on top of the pelvic bones, and you can really kind of start to have a sense and feel that connection. So this is very valuable. So it's worth exploring, feeling that sense of the connection of your hands to the surface you're on with these pelvis bones as the intermediary. And you could even, if it's comfortable for you, you could even take your thumb and just sort of gently poke at just gently kind of make a rhythmic poking downward at the top of the iliac crest and see if you can feel that sensation all the way down to the surface that you're on. So it just updates your model so that you have a clearer sense of where the pelvis is. And so then you can feel that your hands are going to now rest again on the waist. And they're kind of, it's as if they're anchoring the pelvis to the surface that you're on. So we want now the pelvis and the hands to be stable. So we're not going to lift the pelvic bones from the surface. They're going to remain in contact. And what we're going to do is we're going to, and again, I'm just describing it before we do it. We're going to maintain that contact, and then we're going to side bend just as far as is comfortable to one side. You can choose which side. So you're feeling, again, that the hand and the pelvis remain stable. So the pelvis is not lifting up, but there's a lengthening on the side. So one side is lengthening and one side is shortening. Okay, so let's now explore doing that movement. So you're going to keep the hands on the waist, and you feel the connection of the hand through the pelvic bones to the surface that you're resting on. Maintain that stability of the pelvis So you feel with your hands that the pelvis remains in this stable position. So it's not leaning. The pelvis is not going to lift or lean. It will remain stable. And then side bend to either side. We'll do both. So you just choose one side. And only go as far as is comfortable for you. So that might be a very small bend. And then come back to upright. And let's just repeat that a few times. So just bending to the side, same side each time. And then coming back to upright. So as you're doing this, just notice where, so your hand is placed there still on the waist, so you can feel probably with your hand where there's tension. And then you can start to just be curious about how much of that is necessary. So just repeat this a couple more times, and each time you're doing it slowly, smoothly, and you want to just be exploring this possibility that whatever tension you're noticing, that you can soften that. Now, obviously there's some minimal amount of tension necessary in order to do the movement, but can virtually guarantee you it's less than what you're presently doing. So just be aware. Just do one or two more if that's comfortable for you. And you may notice something very surprising. I notice that my pelvis is much more stable and my waist is much more relaxed, at least on the one side, the side that was lengthening. And so when you next come to upright, just remain here and just take a few breaths and notice what you can let go of. And then we're going to do the same to the other side. So you're going to just keep the pelvis stable where it is, and you're going to side bend to the other side from what you were doing, and then come back to upright. And it's important you only go as far as is comfortable. So we've all learned how to emulate certain things reasonably successfully, but that hasn't given us good results in life. So here it's not about emulating, it's about really tuning into the somatic experience, which is not about emulating something outwardly. It's not about reproducing the what you think of as the good way, but it's about being right in between those. So you're feeling into what this experience actually is. And you're getting all kinds of information that previously was unconscious, but it's registering consciously. And your nervous system is making all kinds of adjustments, it's learning. So you're just slowly and smoothly side bending and then coming back to upright, all within your range of comfort, not moving excessively beyond that, just to the edge and then back. And making sure that the pelvis remains in contact with the surface that you're on, and that you can feel with your hand under your fingertips how the waist can lengthen and soften and be supple. And then just when you next come to upright, you're just going to remain here, bring the hands to the lap or to the sides, and just notice what this experience is like. Just as we've done before, you're noticing any impulses to adjust, and you're not making any adjustments. So you're not making any movement intentionally. You're just continuing to rest, continuing to notice, and you're allowing for this to integrate so that your nervous system can update your model and let go of those patterns that are not supportive of the goals that you have. So you have goals to be able to move with ease, to be able to navigate your life successfully. And this is all what you're aware of presently, those impulses to move back into a pre-existing pattern. Those are part of what keeps you from fully realizing those goals. So we're just wanting to let those dissolve. So you notice the impulses, feelings of something twisted or distorted, and you just just continue to allow those to be there and let go, soften, release. And hopefully you experience this shift. You'll notice it. And the more, once you have that experience, you'll be more familiar with it. And then you can start to discover how to, let's say, reproduce that experience more efficiently. So really what the real aim here is just to have that, to discover that experience of how to become conscious of something, how to soften or release it, how to allow that to integrate. And we use all of these ideas and concepts and movements and so forth in order to, as teaching aids for that. In the longer run, our aim is to simplify. So you have the experience, you learn from the experience, and then you gain some degree of mastery. And then we just keep letting that feed back into this learning process so that we gain more proficiency. So initially it may seem like nothing. You may not be aware of anything that's happened. That's a possibility. But whatever you may think about it, as long as you followed along, there's definitely something has happened. So whether you think that this was magnificent and life-changing or not, something has happened. And so there's a change in the nervous system, and you should be aware that it won't happen to everybody, but it happens often enough that it's something to be aware of, is that it can persist for some time, a sense of, as when the patterns become conscious to some degree, then these impulses to move back into the pattern, the sense of I'm leaning, I'm distorted, I'm twisted, something's not right because I'm not matching my existing model, that can sometimes persist for 24 hours or so. And so you want to just be aware that that's a possibility, and that can show up as simply wanting to move back into the pattern, or it could show up as discomfort. It could show up as irritation. So all of these things are possibilities, not guaranteed. So don't worry about that. But if you notice any of these things, then just take it as a positive sign that this shift is taking place, and just continue the same process of just be aware, notice the impulses to move back into the patterns, back into the familiar, and just dissolve, soften, release. And you'll see that that will help facilitate that shift so that it can be fully integrated. And then what will happen is you won't have that irritation anymore. So Be gentle, be patient, be kind to yourself. And another thing is that you'll probably notice over the next day or few days, these tendencies toward violence. They weren't as obvious before, but they become more apparent through this work. It's somewhat subtle, so sometimes people report that they don't know what I'm even talking about for many months, but eventually everybody notices it. So just be watchful for it. Just notice these tendencies to use violence, to use momentum, to just try and emulate something, to try and just achieve something at any cost. And what we want to see is that cost actually is too great. So the patterns are there. The patterns continue to promote a vicious cycle. And that's why we have to just be aware and let them dissolve. And it can take a little bit of time. So it requires patience, and it's very well worth it though. So I think that covers it all. But if you have any concerns, any questions, or anything that comes up, please do let me know. You can always reach out to me. My intention with this is that this is a powerful, positive transformation for you, meaning that your life, you have an experience of greater ease and freedom at all levels in your life. That, as I'm saying in many different ways, there's a transition phase in which it becomes conscious, and then we gain greater clarity, and then those new, more efficient patterns are established. And during that process, that learning process, there can be some sense of discomfort that manifests in these various ways that I've just described. But if you're patient with the process and you're gentle with the process, and you keep looking in the way that I've been pointing out, you will find that your experience does become better. And that's the aim. So if you are finding that you're struggling with that in any way, or you have any doubts, please do let me know. That's what I'm here for. I'm not here just to flap my gums. It's because I'm genuinely wanting you to have benefit from this, and so I'm here to support that. It's really important to me that you don't just go it alone if you're having any struggles or doubts, because we can usually clear this up pretty quickly and easily. So you can reach out to me by email, or if you have access to the messenger group, of course, you can reach out to me that way. So that's it for now. Thank you, everybody. Blessings to you all, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.